A warm welcome to everyone watching this show. I'm Harshita S. Nair from second year chemical engineering, and I'll be your host for today. We have with us eminent advocate practicing at Madras High Court, Mr. Sanjay Pinto, sir. Talking about sir, a lawyer, a journalist, a TV show host, a public speaker, a columnist, a author, you name it, he has done it all. We are extremely glad and honored to have you with us today, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashita. You can also drop the sir if you don't mind.
So, before we jump into the interview, we at Festember are very glad and proud to announce that we are collaborating with CRY for this particular edition of Festember. CRY stands for Child Rights in You. It is a 41-year-old NGO that's been working tirelessly to ensure that children across our country have a blissful childhood and all their rights are safe and secured. We are working with CRY to ensure this particular mission of them. CRY works on various aspects, including child labor, child marriage, child trafficking, malnourishment, and even dropout from school. All of us know that this pandemic has affected every single one of us. And the worst hit are these children and their families from these marginalized communities. And so, this is when CRY requires our help right now more than ever. And so, I have posted the CRY donation link in the comment section and I've pinned it up. So please do have a look at it and contribute whatever little you can so that will make a great impact in someone else's life. Thank you. And with that said, let's jump into the interview. So my first question would be, what was your childhood dream? What was your ambition in school?
Strangely enough, unlike most other kids, I was very focused in what I wanted to become. It was my dad who put this idea of becoming a journalist at a very tender age, and I'm talking about just after my kindergarten, where he started this habit of writing a diary every day, a report for the day, and then those days that report meant which neighbor's window pane we broke while playing cricket, or who was a new person who had come to the neighborhood, or what something interesting that happened in school. So that became a sort of a habit. And as I grew up, I started writing letters to the editor much before you had the social media and blogs and all that. The only outlet for a lay person, as it were, to contribute to the mainstream newspapers. There are no television channels also then except Doordarshan when I was growing up. So I started writing letters to the editor in the Indian Express, and gradually, seeing my determination, I was the only, probably the youngest contributor to that column from the age of I think 12 or 13. And I would go to the Indian Express office, then it used to be on Mount Road, and meet the journalists, the senior editors there, hand over my letters, and many of them were published. And to actually see my name in print was quite something. It did a lot to my morale. And of course, I started developing interest in public service, and I started taking up issues in public interest. So for a large part of my childhood, it was journalism. And then somewhere, I guess, in the middle, maybe just before I went into the 10th standard, I nurtured dreams of becoming an Indian police service officer. I wanted to become an IPS officer, probably because I was actually bullied as a child. I was bullied by some cantankerous neighbors. And then my friend's father my classmate's dad was happened to be the commissioner of police. So I told him about it and he took action. And then I used to sort of go to their house. I used to go along with him to the office. So I was, in a sense, enamored by the color of the uniform at that age. So it was the IPS for a long time. Then I joined Loyola College and then got into debating again, full-fledged debating, and journalism as well. Where Indian Express then, from being a contributor to a column, they asked me to write a column on campus life. So I turned a columnist for the Indian Express when I was in Loyola. After Loyola, I didn't want to give up my debating. So then I joined law college because my father always wanted me to study law. So I joined the law college. During my 3 year stint at the law college, I wrote the civil services exam for the IAS and the IPS. Um, God willed otherwise. I wrote it twice, and beyond that, I realized that coming from a middle class family without a financial cushion, it would be chasing a mirage beyond the point. So I gave up after 2 attempts. Uh, I joined NDTV then in the summer of '98, and I continued till 2012. And after that, I decided that I was beginning to sense symptoms of burnout, after 14 and a half years. It was a high pressure job, and I wanted to do something different. So I, in a sense, played prodigal son and went back to my parent profession, as it were. Got enrolled as a lawyer, and here I am. I mean, I haven't severed ties. The umbilical cord with the media has not been snapped as yet. I have one foot, or rather, one toe in the media through my columns, through my books, and through my TV debates whenever they call me to be a panelist.
Yeah, all
Uh,
forms of media. Yeah.
all forms of media, yes, but my mainstay is law practice.
That's been a wonderful journey. So, a true inspiration to all of us because it clearly shows if we are focused on something, we can definitely achieve that.
It probably also
Uh,
shows that you don't have to be tied down to one profession. So,
yes, sir.
you don't have to be tied down to one profession. Sometimes you can actually, you can take a detour and change your
Yeah,
profession.
we can
It was
always experiment and learn a lot of things.
a dramatic thing that I did. I still don't know if I did the right thing, but well, I take it as it comes.
Yes, sir. So, you've been the host for a lot of panel discussions when you were in the NDTV, and you've hosted many debates, you've moderated a lot of debates. What do you think can make a TV debate much productive, and what are the key points that you keep in mind while choosing the panelists for a debate, sir?
Everything except what's going on today in our TV debates. A good journalist, a seasoned news anchor, or a talk show host is somebody who's been there, done that, a general who's fought many wars. So I was an on-field reporter for many years. I mean, I cut my teeth in journalism being on the field, where I covered some of the biggest stories from the tsunami to the arrests, sensational political arrests, natural disasters, terror strikes, all kinds of things we've covered. So with that experience, you take that experience to the studio when you anchor things. The first thing that we would do often, I mean, I got a chance to anchor towards the fag end of my tenure in NDTV, particularly when I went on a 2-year deputation to head NDTV Hindu,
Yeah.
which was a tie-up, a joint venture between NDTV and the Hindu newspaper. That was a local channel. So I headed that editorially as the executive editor. There I got to do my own shows like Chennai Speaks Out, the weekly show, and several other primetime bulletins. The focus then those days would be to get relevant panelists, to brief them and tell them what exactly is the topic, not just the subject, the topic. And then have about maybe not too many of them. It was Chennai Speaks Out. We had, I think, about 4 panelists. Today, the problem is that you have enough panelists to play a cricket match. 11 people peeping out of these small pigeonholes on the screen, and each one, trying to put their finger up as if they are playing umpire and signaling someone's dismissal, and not being allowed to speak, hardly 10 seconds, and then they are interrupted. The first thing is, you have to respect the other person's view. You have to respect a contrarian view. A debate means different shades of opinion, not the anchors. The anchor is there only, as the name suggests, the moderator to moderate that, not to have an extreme view and shout down all the others who are taking a contrarian view. So the first thing is to have a limited number of panelists, not the usual suspects, but people who are relevant to that particular field, who are respected in that field, and to allow them to speak, not to interrupt beyond off at a tangent. That's when you come in. But by and large, you should allow people to speak, because it's only through different shades of opinion that you actually have a debate. What a debate is has been lost on several people today, and it's sad to see the kind of format that debates have degenerated into.
Yes. So, talking about debates, you've also moderated the landmark debate, which is now only for students. And looking at the students speak and give their opinion, what do you feel about the growing political awareness the student of today have?
Okay, I've noticed something over the years, and I don't know if it's changed today. Always felt that students in school are very active when it comes to public speaking, debates, or rhetorical competition. But the moment they go to college, perhaps it's the work, it's the project pressure or exam pressure or peer pressure. I don't know, where they really seem to be less keen in debating when they come to college. I don't know if it's still the case. At least I noticed that a few years ago. The landmark debate was actually supposed to have been for adults, for
Yeah.
politicians, for journalists, and all. Then we gradually found that it's better to. So that actually we did a couple of editions, and then that's over. I mean,
Yeah.
Landmark itself doesn't exist now as a bookstore, very sadly. So we started off with good intentions, and then we tried to have other debates, but somehow we felt that the response was lukewarm. And for
Mm.
some reason, while youngsters are politically aware, I think youngsters today are our only hope. They are politically aware, but perhaps a little I don't know, they probably become a little cynical about things, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them with the way you see things around. So they are unwilling, perhaps a little unwilling, yes, to get their feet wet in the rough and tumble of political discourse. I mean, that's something that I have observed, frankly.
Yes, sir. Very true. Because as we grow up, we kind of want to take that neutral stand, and we just want to be that cat on the wall, neither side. We don't want to lean on any side, and we don't want to get into any trouble. So that kind of
See, but I
happens
must
with the
having said
generation
that,
today.
for instance, you had a political party formed by IIT students, the Lok Paritran. I mean, sometimes good intentions don't always matter. Today, in the political field that we are in, you need money power and muscle power. And if you don't have that, and of course alliances and all that, it's very difficult. So I think youngsters perhaps have burnt their fingers a little when it comes to the political field. But I see a lot of youngsters active on the social media, and there again, I feel some of them, their lines are blurred between dissent and abuse. Some of them have radical views, which I think we to respect. But sometimes it turns vituperative and abusive. That's when we need to draw the line somewhere.
So, talking about money and power, do you feel, sir, that the codes in India are still quite inaccessible to the lower strata of our society, and people with money and power are kind of able to use this resource very explicitly? Um, why is this happening? And as a society, what can we do to change this, sir?
I had written about this issue in one of my legal columns, Justice for All.
Just
I titled it, A-listers versus dissenters, where, the immediate provocation was the plight of a Jesuit priest, Father Stan Swami, who had to wait for weeks on end just to be given a sipper and a straw because the 83-year-old prison, inmate had, Parkinson's, and Parkinson's is a classified disability under the Act. So he couldn't even hold a cup, and he needed a straw and a sipper, and they took weeks to give him one. Finally, after a public outcry and petitions in court, he finally got one. But there are several high-profile people, the well-heeled in society, who managed to get relief from the courts. They're able to, hire top-notch lawyers, which is sad. I mean, I wouldn't say that the courts have always been this way. There are cases where, even in the past, there were cases where a simple inland letter or a postcard sent to the court would be treated as a public interest litigation, and
yeah.
action has been ordered. Even today, the courts do step in, but this is the public perception that certain high-profile cases, they get blown out of proportion, and there's an impression that's sought to be created that yes, it's only for the rich and the powerful, and not for the underdog, not for the common man. I remember Justice Krishna Iyer once saying that the court must. He was talking about officious interveners. The doors must not be ajar for officious interveners, but the little man must not be prevented from speaking up. The common man, the little man, you and me, we shouldn't be prevented from speaking up. So I think there's a lot to do in terms of legal reforms to make it more accessible, so that the courts, let's face it, are the last ray of hope in our country, and therefore there's a huge responsibility on the judiciary to rein in the executive when they commit excesses, to rein in the legislature when they go beyond the constitution, and the media as well.
So you are an eminent public speaker, and you're one of my greatest inspirations as well, sir. So do you think public speaking can be taken as a profession or a career today?
Thank you. That's very generous of you, Ashita. Um, it all depends. I mean, there are people who, I mean, I use public speaking as a career today in terms of my legal practice, my law practice as a litigator. Public speaking helps me. Public speaking will help you in any field. See, if you're a good public speaker, if you're a good communicator, in every field it's required. If you go into, take up a corporate job, you'll have to address people, you'll have to address seminars, you'll have to, address meetings. There again, you have to make a pitch somewhere. So be it, and even if you're a doctor, you have to talk to a patient. To make a correct diagnosis, you'll have to read their body language, try and find out things, ask the right questions, get the right answers. So in every walk of life, communication will help you. Whether public speaking per se alone as a standalone profession, I don't know, at least not in India for now, because in the West, yes, you have these motivational speakers. They're coming up now. There's the new breed is emerging of motivational speakers and all that. But I don't think public speaking as a standalone profession, the time is ripe in India for it to actually take off. But public speaking in any other profession will give you a distinct advantage and help you steal a march over many others.
Yes, so very true. So we've also planned for a fun session today. It's like a rapid fire round where we would give you like very common legal terms that we read in newspapers and that comes in news and stuff, but we are not quite sure about the meaning of such terms. So I would like you to explain that term in such a way that how would you explain this and make a 3-year-old kid understand the meaning of the term? So, in a very simplified way, I would like you to give the definition for these terms. So, my
By the way,
first term would be um, quid pro quo.
quid pro quo, you mean? Okay. That
Yeah.
is, basically you scratch my back, I scratch yours. It's a reciprocal arrangement. You do something for me, I do something for you. I hope
Yes.
that's simple enough for the layperson.
Yes. Yes. And the second one is modus operandi.
Okay, that is a method of doing something, usually related to a crime. A criminal used a particular way of entering the house or particular manner of conning somebody to part with their, ATM debit card PIN number. So that's the modus operandi, the method adopted
Yeah.
by a person to violate the law and to commit a crime.
Commit a crime. Yes. Sir. And sapona.
Okay, Sabina, that is basically an order from a court to do a particular act. It's a court order that you get.
Okay. And alibi.
Okay, that's an excuse that you were someone accuses you of committing a crime, and you say, "No, I was not present there. I was actually present at this party." You see, this friend of mine can also testify that I have an alibi. So, an excuse that you were not present there, a reason rather that you were not present there, it's a valid legal defense.
Yes. Sir. And an amicus curiae.
Okay, that's like an officer of the court. Several times, the courts would want someone to go and find out, do a fact-finding mission to assist the court in finding out certain facts and circumstances of a particular case. So, in many cases, they appoint a senior lawyer who is present there and request them to assist the court. So that's amicus curiae.
A nexus.
Nexus is a connection, usually in the context of something unholy, a nexus between, let's say, politicians and the underworld. I mean, so that's what nexus means. It means a connection, an illegal connection.
So that was really fun, sir. So we'll move back into the interview. So my next question would be, in the recent years, a lot of media trials have occurred, and media has been having its own debate, and so-called the representatives of the people are coming and giving their opinion about this. Do you think these panel discussions or debates have affected the judgment of the court in any way? Do they have any kind of positive or negative impact?
The media trial is the most hotly debated topic today. I would say it's the media that is on trial. See, on the one hand, the media has the right to be adversarial. That's the role of the media, to be adversarial, to question the powers that be, to speak truth to power. Okay, but the media has a right to be to play an investigative role. Okay, to expose things. No one can take away that. That's a fundamental right guaranteed to the media, to every citizen, not just the media, under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India. That right extends to readers and viewers as well. But that right is not unbridled. It is not a free for all. That right is subject to reasonable restrictions under Article Clause 19, Clause 2 of the Constitution. So, defamation, inciting violence, anything against unity and integrity of the nation, several, contempt of court. All these are reasonable restrictions. Now, what happens when a mere allegation is made against someone? We saw that especially the latest case being Sushant Singh Rajput's case. When a mere allegation is made against someone, usually a high-profile person, the media goes berserk and they conduct their own trial in a sense. Okay, so the anchor in the studio is the judge, jury, and executioner. So in the court of public opinion, they hang someone. Okay, now that actually interferes with the administration of justice. Let's face it, all of us, the most cherished, the most important fundamental right under the Constitution. A fundamental right, unlike other rights, is not merely granted but guaranteed. That is what distinguishes a fundamental right from other rights, that they're not granted, they're guaranteed. And Article 21, the right to life and personal liberty, very clearly says, except according to procedure established by law, no one can deprive you of your right to life and personal liberty, except according to procedure established by law. This procedure established by law cannot be an editorial agenda, or it cannot be a hashtag trending on the social media. Okay, so you have to respect. And the fundamental canon of criminal jurisprudence in our country is the presumption of innocence. What's happening in a media trial is a presumption of guilt. The moment some allegation is there, this person is guilty, hang the person and all. And you do such damage that it's, it cannot be redeemed afterwards. Once a person's reputation is tarnished, you can't get it back. It's a sped arrow. And therefore, I believe that it is this media trial. In fact, now it's coming into focus. Now, courts are also seized with the matter. And I, in fact, in one of my columns, had mooted the idea of a responsible, of an act to ensure responsible news reporting, especially in criminal cases, so that at least still a charge sheet is filed. When you have some idea, because what happens is people go around interviewing others, putting out their own facts. This could even hamper a criminal investigation when it comes to an identification parade. You show people's pictures before that. It could hamper an investigation. It could prejudice the rights of the accused also. Okay, so a media trial, much as having been from the media, having been in the media for so long, I do support my colleagues on the field, but there has to be some kind of restraint so that the administration of justice is not tampered with in any way, unwittingly or wittingly.
So, as we discussed, you've been part of almost all kinds of media, starting from radio to books to newspaper to television. Which is your personal favorite, sir?
Um, I've always been a writer. So actually, I started off with print journalism when I was in school, as I told you. So I've always been fond of writing because writing gives you that space to think, and it's not. Although an American architect once quipped that journalism is literature in a hurry. I believe that writing gives you the freedom and the space to actually think about your thoughts. Television is like breakneck speed. It's like your T20 cricket. Okay, it's like a T20 cricket. Writing is perhaps print journalism is like your one-day international or test cricket. Okay, but television is like you're there. It's extremely powerful. The power of imagery. It's extremely powerful, and it makes a huge impact. I love to write my columns at my pace, which I write weekly. I love to do shows. I've kind of grown out of the thrill of breaking news. I mean, when you're much younger, that adrenaline rush gets to you. So those days when I was much younger and on the field, I loved the breaking news, the thrill of breaking news before anyone else. But today, if you ask me, I'd love to anchor my own shows, to have a proper debate, to ask the tough questions, do those interviews, make it lively. That it shouldn't be boring. It shouldn't be like the anchor or the interviewer shouldn't be too much of himself or herself. Okay, you should understand that there's always another person. It should be like a dialogue or a conversation without interrupting people too much, letting them have their say, questioning them, dissecting issues, analyzing things, respecting a contrarian view. Someone disagrees with you, you can disagree with them, but respect that view. I mean, that civility seems to have gone out, especially on the social media. So yeah,
True,
to
sir.
answer your question directly, print followed by television, and radio was also fun. I mean, I anchored a couple of debate shows on the radio. Radio is
Yes, sir.
also fun, and the fact that but now of course everybody is driving to work. Would tune into a radio station and listen to songs, and and it's also entertaining in the sense that your conversations are interspersed with music.
Yeah.
So I used to host a show for a couple of years on Chennai Live 104.8 FM. It was the only English radio station in the city. So I
Yes.
had fun doing that. But television gave me, while print gave me an initial, sort of the initial experience in journalism. Television made me what I am today. Television gave me that, national recognition and acceptance. I will always be grateful to television and to NDTV for what it made me. But that's a phase that's over in my life. I mean, as you grow older, you think of doing things more meaningful. So law practice is here to stay.
So, talking about your NDTV days, like, do you have one particular interview that you always cherish, or something that's changed your life? One interviewer or an interview, anything in specific?
Mm, See, actually, I've written about 50 stories or interviews that I've done in my NDTV stint. I've written about that in my book called My NDTV Days. You should try and pick up that book, My NDTV Days. See, I had a fairly good rapport with politicians across the divide, different political parties. When late Chief Minister Jayalalitha stopped her convoy to speak to me to give me an interview. I think that was a memorable incident. She had also called out to me after a press conference to thank me for a story I had done. So that is something that always will remain in my mind. Mr. Karunanidhi, I have had, in fact, I polished my Tamil by interviewing him many times because he would speak in that Sen Tamil, and I really owe a lot of my Tamil to Kalainar Karunanidhi. Every time I interviewed him, extremely polite, down to earth person. And in fact, his daughter Kanimudi, who remains a good friend, used to jocularly remark that she would call me Pulavar Pinto. Okay, so I guess political interviews, sports persons. I think Rahul Dravid and I struck a very good rapport. Sachin Tendulkar. The advantage with television journalism as opposed to print journalism is, especially if you're on a bureau, you get to do all beats. So be it scientists, judges, bureaucrats, politicians, sports persons, movie stars. We've interviewed them all. We've covered them all. So it's very difficult to zero in, but these are some of the memorable interviews I've done. They've also been very sad interviews. They've been like, for instance, when I covered the tsunami, and I found that there were children who had lost their parents, too shocked to even grieve. Sometimes, silence can speak volumes. Silence can speak volumes. They say, the song, you say it best when you say nothing at all. So the tsunami was again an unforgettable tragedy that I had to cover.
So, what is your opinion about virtual courts, sir? With this pandemic and the lockdown and stuff, we've been having virtual courts. Do you think it's effective? What are the challenges that the judicial system is facing?
I think full marks to the higher judiciary, especially the Supreme Court and the High Courts. In fact, Madras High Court, there were senior judges like Justice Sivanyanam who really spearheaded this initiative. And actually, I must say that barring a few teething problems, it's going on pretty well. Imagine otherwise for 1 year, if we had not already, there are cases pending in backlog, a huge backlog. Imagine for 1 year if we had not been able to go to court, and it's also not safe also because there are several people. I mean, judges are pretty much senior citizens. Many of them are close to being senior citizens. Extremely risky. So I'm glad that they put in this, and I think now they are slowly going to, even if they open up courts, it's going to be a hybrid system where they will have partial video conferencing and partial physical appearances. Initially, it is difficult. See, one is not all lawyers maybe tech savvy. There are teething problems even for me. Sometimes audio issues are there, audio glitches are there. It's not the same as being in front of a judge producing documents. Filing has its own, e-filing has its own challenges. Sometimes you file something, it doesn't reach. If you're in open court, you just there, you can give another copy to the judge across from the bar to the bench. So there are problems, but I think we've made the best of a bad situation in a sense. And I think it's also, we've having tasted this virtual court scenario. I think going ahead, you can save a lot of time. A lawyer can appear sitting in his home. In fact, I appear in some medical negligence cases before the National Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission in Delhi, sitting in my place in Chennai. Okay, so I don't have to travel. Lawyers can go from one court to another. I've seen several lawyers; their desks are full of laptops, and they just turn from one end. Technology has made this possible. Okay, so I think we need to use this even past the pandemic. God willing, the pandemic gets over, and we can still do a lot. For instance, arbitration. You can save a lot of time. Technology can be used to the hilt, can be exploited to the hilt for the dispensation of justice. So I'm a big fan of virtual courts, but we need to also spare a thought for those, especially the lawyers in mofussil areas and rural areas who may not have proper connectivity and all that. We can't leave them behind. So some system where we take everyone along, that would really help in clearing the backlog of cases.
Yes, sir. So, as we discussed, you've done a lot of things throughout your career. So, what are your future plans, sir? Like 10 years down the line, what would you like to do?
I would like to, I've come close to 250 columns now, legal columns. I would like to probably aim for 500 legal columns and 1,000 after that. So in terms of writing, yes. I would like to at some point be a designated senior advocate in the High Court and later perhaps start going to the Supreme Court. I love arguing. I love to put up a good argument, to put up a good fight. So essentially, I want to make because I spent 15 years in television journalism, and it's only 9 years now as a lawyer. And 9 years is nothing in law. I mean, by now, if I had not joined TV, I would have had 25 years almost of law practice. So in many ways, the lateral entry has a lot of challenges. So the next 10 years, hopefully, God willing, I'll be able to build my practice, try and shrug off the media tag, which still refuses to leave me. Okay, shrug off the media tag and be taken seriously as a lawyer. Specialize in certain areas that I like media law, constitutional law, arbitration, consumer law. So I'd like to, sharpen my legal skills, build my practice, and help a lot more people. At the end of the day, I think that's what we all meant. Whatever profession you are in, how do you help others? How do you contribute to society? How do you contribute to your profession in turn? So I'd like to be a better human being in the next 10 years.
So my final question would be, what is the advice that you would like to give to students who want to pursue a career in the public domain, say civil service or law or journalism for that matter?
Keep your options open. Okay, there are several people who have studied engineering and gone on to become great journalists. There are several students who've been, outstanding gold medalists in IITs and IIMs who have not joined the corporate world but joined the bureaucracy and are doing extremely well as IAS,
Civil
IPS, IFS
servants.
officers. Okay, so I think whatever you do, keep your options open. Give it your all, like there is no tomorrow. Unless you give it your all, you need to be absolutely passionate about what you're doing. Say, if you love your job, uh, find a job you love and you never have to work a day in your life. Okay, so if you really love what you're doing, I think that's something that's very important. That is what will give you job satisfaction. Don't chase money. Chase your passion, chase your dreams, and you can always retrace your steps like I did. Journalism, civil services, uh, TV journalism, law, and yet and still journalism, in a smaller measure. So you can do all these things, and don't come up with don't impose limits on yourself. You can shatter barriers. You just need to have the right attitude, and the sky would only be the beginning. So I think as students need to realize that now is the time for you to make those crucial decisions and never look back. Never ever look back.
Thank you so much, sir. I've had a wonderful time talking with you, and all of us enjoyed it a lot. Hope you also had a great time, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ashita. Thank you. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, sir. It's a
Okay.
big honor for us to have you here at this show. So thank you for joining us, sir. So before we end, I would like to make a small note here. So as I said, the CRY donation link is posted in the comment section and it's also pinned up. So please do have a look at it and contribute whatever little you can. So that will make a great impact in someone's life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashita.